As I am recording this on Friday afternoon, there are still open slots for all of our Shabbat Tefillot in our parking lot. So I want to encourage you to sign up and join us if that interests you and if that's a safe and responsible choice for you to make. And if you don't sign up and if you don't end up joining us in person, please be sure to carve out time to read this week's Torah portion, because this is one of those foundational parshiot with theme after theme after theme that really define what Judaism is, what it means to be a Jew. Sefer Dvarim, the book of Deuteronomy, is known by Chazal as Mishneh Torah, the recapitulation of the Torah. These are speeches that Moshe gave in the final days of his life that recapitulate, that are a repetition of things that we knew and heard about, read about earlier in the Torah. So the first part of Dvarim is a recapitulation of stories, the events that are described in the books of Exodus and the books of Numbers especially are retold from a different vantage point. We get Moshe's perspective rather than the perspective that is given earlier in the Torah to these events. We also get recapitulations of mitzvot with different perspectives and different emphases, and even with different and conflicting details. And so comparing the mitzvot that appear earlier in the Torah with the mitzvot as they appear in Sefer Dvarim allows us to see what it was that was added, what element was missing that had to be emphasized in the final days of Moshe's life in order for the Torah to be complete. Moshe's speech about mitzvot, his first major address about mitzvot, begins in the middle of Parshat V'etchanan and continues and extends all the way through Parshat Ki Tavo. So for several weeks, we are going to be dealing with a number of mitzvot. We can see a very, very famous example of a mitzvah that is repeated, or mitzvot that are repeated in Sefer Dvarim that we know already from earlier in the Torah, with the example of the Aseret HaDibrot, the so-called Ten Commandments. They are found in Exodus chapter 20, and they are found again in Parshat V'etchanan. And there are a number of differences between the Aseret HaDibrot as they appear in Exodus and as they appear in our Parsha this week. Chazal epitomized and described that difference as Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad, a phrase that is familiar to us from Lecha Dodi. Shamor v'Zachor, okay? It says in Exodus, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the Sabbath day, and it says in Deuteronomy, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, to protect and observe the Sabbath day. And Chazal tell us, how could both have been at the same time? So, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad, somehow God said both of those things. Ibn Ezra says, that's impossible. You can't say Shemor v'Zachor at the same time. Try it sometimes. Ibn Ezra says, if you try, it's impossible. You can't say those two things at the same time. You can't hear them at the same time. Ibn Ezra says, it's not literal. Shemor v'Zachor b'dibur echad just means that the meaning of these two words is similar enough that and that's what's actually important. He says the words are like a body, and the meaning of the word is the soul, and what's important is the soul. The meaning is important. The body that contains the meaning, the words that contains the meaning, is much less important. So for Ibn Ezra, Shemor v'Zachor b'dibur echad means that God is telling us you have to keep Shabbos, and Shemor and Zachor, the difference between those two, there's an overlapping semantic field between those two words, and the difference is insignificant. But if you look at the continuation of that dibra, that commandment of keeping Shabbat, as it appears in Exodus and as it appears in Devarim, the difference is not just a word. The difference is really more extensive and deeper and much more significant. Shabbat is described in the book of Exodus as being about our relationship to God as creator. God created the universe, and so we keep Shabbat. In Devarim, Shabbat is introduced as and described as a response to God as our liberator. This has been characterized by Rav Amnon Bazak, among many, many others, as being about a mitzvah that is rooted in our relationship with God, which is how this mitzvah is introduced in Exodus. It's a ben adam l'makom mitzvah, a mitzvah that connects us to God. It's a religious, ritual mitzvah, whereas in Dvarim it's a social, it's an ethical mitzvah, it's an interpersonal mitzvah. It's a mitzvah ben adam l'chaveiro. And Rav Bazak points out that this is actually not just a distinction in how Shabbat is described in Sefer Dvarim. This is actually a theme of Sefer Dvarim more broadly. Mitzvot that are introduced earlier in the Torah as being religious mitzvot, as being ritual mitzvot, are reintroduced, recapitulated in Sefer Devarim as being about interpersonal matters. So we see this. Another example of this is the holidays. In Parshat Emor and Vayikra, we rejoice before God on our holidays. Samachnu Hashem Shivat Yamim, right? The celebration of our festival days in Vayikra is a ritual celebration that connects us to God. Whereas here in Sefer Devarim, there's an ethical, interpersonal component that is added. So, for example, in chapter 16 of Devarim, Parshat Re'eh, v'samachta b'chagecha ata uvincha v'techa v'abdecha v'matcha v'halevi v'ager v'hayatom v'amana. We should rejoice in your festivals, you and your son and your daughter and your male and female servants and the Levi and the stranger and the orphan and the widow. All the disadvantaged, they also have to celebrate the holidays together with you and your family. That's part and parcel of what it means to celebrate a holiday. This element, this interpersonal element, is introduced in Sefer Devarim to a religious holiday that we already knew about from Exodus and from Leviticus as well, and from Numbers too. So both elements together are foundational to what it means to be Jewish, serving God and taking care of other human beings. And taking care of other human beings, being concerned about them, and doing so with a religious humanist mindset. That's what it means to be an authentic Jew, to be rooted to God, connected to God through our mitzvot, and those same mitzvot also connect us to our fellow human beings. And we should be living lives rooted in family and community and beyond. We should be good neighbors and good citizens, and we should do so as part of our devotion to God and part of our obedience to God. And in that way, like that's how that intertwining of ethical and ritual, ben adam lechavero, ben adam makom mitzvot, are intertwined. The same mitzvah has both elements, and Sefer Devarim emphasizes the way in which each mitzvah has those two sides to it, and both of those sides together, that's what it means to be an authentic Jew. So I wish you a peaceful Shabbat and a healthy Shabbat, and I hope either whether you hear it in person in our parking lot or whether you read these words from a chumash at home, please take them to heart. It's really what being Jewish is all about. I wish you Shabbat, Shalom, blessed day to you and your family and to all of your loved ones.